Dome homes. Yeah, they're really ugly.
I'm gonna defend my Namekian homes if you tear me apart.
Welcome to Podcast Undecided, aggressively undecided podcast.
Yeah, today we're talking about concrete. What is concrete? It's a mixture of cement, aggregate, sand, and water. You mix it together and it makes bricks. It's amazing. I've been learning about like stonemasonry, especially like ancient stonemasonry. And that's been like way more interesting than concrete, and I've been getting distracted every time I try to research. I just end up like researching about Peruvian ruins and stuff like that, or like Roman like methodologies and things, and I'm like, oh, this is like way more, like I'm like just diving into that. I'm like, yeah, this has nothing to do with concrete, but I'm just like looking at ancient chiseling techniques and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, this is...
Going back to what you said about the pyramids, I just find it crazy how just everywhere on like every continent, just there's some type of pyramid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't want to get into aliens, but you know, it's aliens.
Gosh, I've been watching The Perfect Counter for, and it's amazing. Like just learning about how they actually carve granite. So copper, easy to spot, shiny things. You pull it out of the ground. You've got copper. You melt it down. You can make it into a tube. Attach that tube to a stick. And then you just spin it, add a slurry of like just clay and stuff like that, and it's just automatically hard. Like they've got a corundum. It's like the hardest bit of sandpaper you can get, and it's easy to find. You could just dig it up. There's like the two earliest mines that people find are corundum mines and copper mines, because you mix that stuff in, it can cut through granite. It's like the hardest material you can get next to diamond. And so you just, and it doesn't even have to be like a rock or something. It's like early sandpaper. It's a slurry. Mm-hmm. And so you just put a little clay circle around it. You fill it up with this like corundite slurry, and then you take a copper tube with a pole, and you just spin it, and it's got a big rock on top of it. And you just spin that thing, and it makes a perfect hole, like a drill cut.
Nice.
And it's just like, I've just seen like these two archaeologists just sit there and like taking turns, just drilling a perfect hole into a granite slab.
That's pretty cool.
And it's just like, oh, and then they're showing how you can use that to like mount things to it, to carry it and do all these things. When they're like, there's no way that anyone could ever precisely drill a hole this accurate without like, it was like, the answer is it took time.
Yeah.
It took a lot of people and a lot of time. And like we build things nowadays, where like we built the tallest building in the world in 4 years. Well, like before, like even like looking at like the, like, like some of these old palaces from like 200 years ago, it would take 40 years to build these palaces. And we'd be embarrassed of our project. You know, you order a house and it's like, all right, a $2 million house, it's going to take about 40 years and we'll get it done. You're like, no, I want it done next year.
Yeah.
And it's like, and these old structures, they have evidence of them taking generations to build.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, like we're like, no one could possibly ever chisel it. It would take like a year to get through it. It's like, it did.
It did.
It did. It took 50 people a year to do it, but they did it, and it's insane.
Yeah, because some
Some
pharaohs and stuff, like when they were building their pyramids, it's like, okay, yeah, I may not finish this. They found evidence that they were like, yeah, they probably started it but didn't finish it, and they were just like, okay, they kind of retroactively like put the pharaoh in afterwards, which was just like, oh yeah, that's something. Like he came in his rule and he probably just started this thing. Okay, should be done by the time I'm done. And he's like, evidently not.
One of the proto-concretes that was used in that time and area was mud bricks. The idea of taking like, you know, you just in mud, put it together, you mix it in with some like dried out hay and things like that, and you end up with like a really strong material. It like built like the ziggurats of like the ancient past, which were giant like proto-Egyptian pyramids in a sense. There's big mud brick things that are still standing today.
Yeah.
Like we need to put in some pictures of those if we can find them.
Yeah.
And then there's these, like I found out about these giant, it's exactly like how you would do it with concrete, but with mud, of these like temples in Africa. And they're just made out of mud with just smoothed over mud on them and stuff like that. And they got like wood pillars sticking out of them, and they look insane. And the problem is a lot of them just don't last. Like it's the same. But it was just constantly easy to repair, easy to build, these giant mud structures. And it just makes sense once you figure out like, oh, you can quickly build this up. You can quickly, you know, like repair it, and it'll last you generations at these huge cities.
I get you.
And like, it's like that was the first inkling of, you know, like mud construction using like ceramic, or, you know, like using that stuff. You make it, you harden it, you bake it. and you would go with it. And then like eventually people started figuring out like more advanced techniques, and like that's where like mortar starts to come into play, which is like an even earlier form of like concrete, where it's like people figured out like there was a certain rock that if you cooked it, it would turn into something weird that when you poured, like I can imagine it being an accidental find. Like, okay, we had these rocks sit around the fire and stuff like that, we put our wood on it, and when we went to put out the water, like put out the fire, the rocks did something weird. Like they started bubbling and turned into this weird paste, and then like it hardened over and took the shape of whatever was around it. And so just like people were like, that's weird, and just kind of like having a weird moldable rock and stuff like that. It was probably the first discovery of mortar, and then people doing it on purpose, like purposely burning this white rock so that way they could get this weird mortar material that they would use to like glue things together. And like that was the first mortar, like quicklime is what it was called in history. And so people would just like use this stuff, but it was hot. Like it'd take a long time for this to happen. It wouldn't be like over one time. It was like over a week. It was about how long you have to bake this rock for it to actually start to do these things, to like break down. And so they build these kilns specifically for this, and they built 7 of them. And so you know there was a concrete plant because there'd be 7 kilns.
Where at?
This was mostly Rome area where they started building these kilns.
Okay.
Because it'd take a week for it to cook. So if you got one going every day of the week, you've got a constant supply of cement coming out of these things. And they were dangerous. They were explosive. Like you pour the water on this stuff, and it's just a highly like heat-producing reaction. It's bubbly. It's acid. It's nasty. But so what they would do is they'd like ship the stuff off and try to keep it sealed, and then on site they'd start mixing the slurry, and they'd have to get to work like putting it like right away to seal all the rocks into place, because you know like it hardened super fast. And that's where Roman concrete came to play, because they actually started mixing in other stuff that would cause it to slow down, and like it wouldn't get as hot, it wouldn't get as nasty, and they actually had time to work with it, which is like where the first modern cement came into play.
A lot of people kind of attribute Rome to the first base of like concrete, but like the ancient Egyptians may have probably used it for the pyramids. There's this one guy who in like the 70s who like theorized that the pyramids are actually like hauled, big chunks of rock hauled all the way to the pyramid site. They're kind of just taken and cast in place.
That'd be interesting.
Where it's basically.
So what you're saying is like there was no like pushing it up the side of the goddamn.
No.
Like it was just built literally right on top of like each brick built on top of the other.
Yeah, it's kind of like they took a form, made the form, and took. It's not like the typical concrete used to. It's a different formula, but basically the same. Concrete's just known as like liquid rock.
I've seen something like that with the Olmec statues, where they showed like if you dig into the ground, you can dig the shape of those giant heads, and then pour in concrete to get like. And then dig it out, and which they were trying to explain why there might be like there's seams on them, and like why that might be a case. But like we're not really good at identifying like concrete versus like natural stone, especially when it's really old.
Yeah, and I guess it just goes back to like this thing is like thousands of years old. It's just like if you see concrete thousands of years old, it may look like actual rock just been quarried just because of the ancient.
It could also be settling.
Yeah, and all that time, especially with the pyramids, it's been compacted over centuries and centuries, and just the compaction process just makes it harder and harder. So basically that limestone is basically a rock at that point. And it was just one guy in the 70s, and he kind of theorized that he did some experiments in it, and he actually took it to a lab. He had his theorized formula, took it, made it, and then sent an actual piece of the pyramids to the lab and compared the samples, and the lab actually couldn't really tell the difference.
Yeah.
So it's potentially possible that the pyramids were actually just cast concrete.
Or even parts of it at least.
Yeah, because there are those granite portions that they may have hauled up, but I mean, compared to the whole pyramid versus just, those little beams basically.
I would harbor to guess, like, because I feel like there's a lot of evidence of chiseling for the base of it, but I know it used to have like a mirror finish kind of like siding to it, cladding, and that for sure, like I mean it might be carved, but still the idea of just being able to pour cladding over the top of it after you have your main structure, and to get like that perfectly smooth edges that it used to have.
Yeah.
It feels like that could be definitely
It's almost like how they do in new construction, when you have to put stucco on.
Exactly. Yeah.
It could just be something similar to that. I could see where it's just like you just want to seal the outside, make it look pretty,
And here's the thing: stucco is quicklime, or like a mixture of it. They have like added more stuff to it, but it's like you pour it on there, and it's like it crumbles a little. Like if you like with your hand, you can kind of crumble stucco, which is where it starts to see the difference between old and new. Where the concrete we use, like the cement we use now, is a lot harder than the quicklime of the past by adding some new materials to it.
Yeah.
But it's like, the idea of just being able to seal off your walls with something that keeps them from rotting as quickly or just holding things together.
Yeah.
It's like something that's really, like it's a really strong connection to the past that I feel like a lot of us just glaze over a lot of times because you don't really think about the walls we live in a lot.
Yeah. And even if at least the chisel marks as a whole, if you see some construction sites, if there's a slight error, they would usually chisel it out just to kind of fix the error. So I mean, chisel marks don't necessarily mean that it's not cast in place. It means that it could just, they're trying to make a perfectionist pyramid. Sure. So which is why you're going to try and get it as close as you can.
Oh yeah, and that's what I think. Especially with the outside finish and the cladding that used to be there, I could see that definitely being poured.
Yeah.
I think there's just like a lot of stone quarries where they've got like unfinished blocks that have been like cracked and found, which to show maybe if they like needed something like an emergency repair or for fit and finish, getting things like perfect. Concrete's a really good option for getting those things in there.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
How many different types of concrete are there?
So it depends. They've got shotcrete, which is for water. You've got quickcrete, where you want it quickly. I think there's an acronym called like mortar, and like there's different bags and they have different like letters named like type M, type S.
I don't type M. I think that's the strongest one.
Yep.
And I think that's what at least I think that's what they use in foundations.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
So type M is 100% concrete, and so as you go down the letters, like in the like acronym mortar, is the percentage you get to. I think type R is pure quicklime, or just like regular, like the old-fashioned stuff, and type M is the new stuff, and everything in between is a mixture in percentages between pure concrete and pure quick concrete, or whatever they call it.
So so that on that same scale, the PSI goes up throughout the scale, or how do they actually?
It depends on what you're using it for. Like there's some concrete constructions that use pure the old stuff, and one of the advantages, it's easy to repair. So like, let's say if you got a brick structure, like there's people like you can actually like chisel out the old stuff with a screwdriver, which is not something you'd want. But if it's a structure that's going to be constant, like if it's an old structure that's constantly going through renovations, you want to have those renovations like to be able to be reversible or repairable. Versus the new concrete, you can't just chip out a brick from it and replace it if the brick's been damaged. Most of the time, you wouldn't want to replace a brick in a building anyways. You'd probably be repairing the whole wall.
Yeah, very much.
I can see that.
Yeah, and everything with new construction is kind of tied together, especially with pours. In post-tension buildings, it's even just trying to chip out like say a slab and it's post-tension. It can be super dangerous because all those like the cable is like this big and it's underneath tension, and as soon as it snaps, if you hit it and it snaps, people can die just because it's just.
And that's one of the advantages and disadvantages, like where some of these older buildings can be continuously repaired with the newer buildings. If it's got a crack in it, it's really hard. Like it's an ongoing study to figure out how do you repair a building with a major crack that could be like just like this big, and it's like a full endeavor to try to find a material that can bind the concrete, especially with the tensioning problems. Like they're trying to find it, and it's like interesting that these older buildings can sometimes outlast these newer buildings, while the newer buildings will go longer before they can do more, hold more weight, be larger, longer spanning bridges, but they're not repairable. But they're going to take 100 years before they need to be repaired, while some of these buildings can last for 500, 600 years and be constantly upkept.
Yeah.
So it's always a trade-off.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's kind of like which one is better, like having a car that's easy to repair, or just having a car that's gonna break down once, but when it's done, it's done.
Yeah. Yeah, so you imagine having a car that lasts for 50 years versus a car that lasts for 10 years, but you can keep repairing it and it'll last for 100, but you still got a car from 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like looking at these old bridges and you're like, you could fit like maybe one car across it versus the new ones that are like 6 lanes across and spanning a mile. So there's always cost benefits.
Yeah,
I can see that.
and I guess application definitely comes into a factor.
Have you seen, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about repairing the buildings, but I think this is more like for residential homes.
Oh, yeah.
Like say if they get like a slab break, I've seen more or less, I guess, demonstrational videos. And I don't know if this was per se like, just kind of like either this is something we think in theory would work or something they actually done, but like let's say, the camera's not going to see this, but let's say this is the crack right here. On either side, they would kind of just chisel out more or less like a pathway into the concrete, put rebar down, and put like at the ends of it, it would be almost like they're cut. They would basically cut out like an eye for the most part, and then put the rebar in there and whatever they may, and then kind of just patch it over. And I guess that's supposed to just kind of hold it together.
Yeah.
But that's just
that's one of the ways that they repair foundations. You just cut the square and then basically you drill into the concrete a little bit, add some epoxy, and then you kind of shove the rebar in there, just so you can get that link back into the old and the new, just so it kind of acts more like one than two separate pieces. Just if you have the two separate, the contraction and expansion just is off, and you kind of end up with more cracks.
Yeah. Especially like pre-planning where your cracks go in concrete, because it's going to crack, and if you don't like give it those areas to crack where you want it to, and it's like where it's like with sidewalk, how it's got like the grooves cut into it, and just stuff like that.
I see that a lot of the time in driveways, and I don't know if that's mainly just because of like rainwater kind of just taking the dirt from underneath the driveway, but like I saw it, that's usually where I know those cracks. It's just it goes up and then it'll crack and then it'll continue the driveway. I think that one has that issue.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where like modern, when you're doing it, you're supposed to give it seams for it to crack in, because that way it relieves the tension and it relieves it where you want it to, rather than the concrete just deciding what is the best path. Because it's gonna crack. It's just how it goes.
You kind of like,
well, we can like implement this into baking, like when you got like a really nice cookie but you don't want it to fall apart, you just put a little seam in there so it just splits apart in half.
I've seen
you can.
do this. Oh yeah, you hit the 3 lines in the bread. You see the rolls with the lines pre-cut into it.
Yeah. I'm just hungry. I was thinking about cookies.
Oh man, we got food just sitting out there waiting for us.
Yeah.
Dome homes. Yeah, they're really ugly.
Okay, I'm gonna defend my Namekian homes and tear it apart.
Don't get me wrong. So I love the concept of dome homes, because like they're just like, at least in Florida, down here where we're near the equator and we have hurricanes and just strong winds and things like that. They're great in that aspect, but it's just more or less the thing that gets me every single time is just kind of like, I guess no one's really put too much time at how the outside of the home looks, because they just like when you have a when you do monolithic dome homes, not like the geodesic ones, but when you do those, it just it's just kind of like a painted concrete building. It's not the most eye appealing. And
so what about murals? Like, instead of you don't have to use shingles, right, for them?
No, because it's just everything's just concrete.
So could you have like professionals who are like just called out to come and paint like custom designs for these things? Because I feel like a lot of them are just kind of like just left plain, and I feel like that's a missed opportunity for the material.
No, without a doubt. I mean, that just goes into whatever the homeowner wants. Personally, I would, something like that sounds pretty cool to me.
Have you never seen one landscape too? Like with full on like bushes around the sides and trees, like just kind of like with like, because I'm just imagine a dome home but with like 4 trees, or like just kind of like an over canopy around it too.
Oh.
I mean, you would need like I feel like you just need a good designer to kind of bring the actual home itself to life, because like, when we're used to just, square construction, just everything's is just, hard angles. It's just like, that's something to look at. It needs to be pretty if you want to get people to catch up on it.
All of our furniture is like designed to go up against a square wall. You've got a bookshelf, you've got a painting, you've got a desk. It's all got to fit into a square or a circular interior. Cake. Oh. Dinner happened.
Okay. Well, yeah, magic of it.
Darren got up and he laughed. Gotta let everyone know.
So like, how does like plumbing and electrical stuff work in those? Are they like all through the ground?
I would imagine so. Like everything's just done at the underground, and one of the big issues I saw, or I wouldn't really call it an issue, is just it kind of came to me is just not a lot of them are 2 stories, you know. And if they are 2 stories, it's mainly just like a loft above it, so it's not like you really need to have plumbing up there.
Yeah.
So like it kind of forces you to keep the plumbing as simple as possible. Everything's going to be ground level, probably ran out to wherever the septic tank or go to the city or whatever. Yeah. But definitely everything would probably ran underground. And I know on a lot of these homes, what they do is you're going to have a wall somewhere where you're going to have like an electric panel that probably isn't going to like fit exactly onto that curve. It's probably going to be like built into it or have something stepping out of it to kind of meet the needs of whatever needs to actually be there.
If they're large enough, do you think it could be like a circular exterior with actually square interior rooms?
I can see that, but that would be huge.
Yeah,
that would be huge.
Our wall thickness is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
How do you think that ties into like the modern? I love 3D printing, and like people know I've got a problem with that. But I actually really hate the idea of 3D printed houses.
No.
But at the same time, I feel like they play in on one of their strengths. It's like is these dome homes of being able to like sit there and have a machine to sit there and pump these out really quickly.
Yeah, I guess
on a large scale.
Yeah, and dome homes definitely would be actually a really good place for 3D printing, because you can just get that full continuous circular and all the way to the tip, and then just stop right there.
And short.
You probably have to go back and just smooth it out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's the majority of the work done.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thought of that, especially because you can automate it and just have like a lot of the complex structures of having like in between crossbars. Like it can actually make the spaces for the rebar as it's like making cinder blocks in real time.
That would probably be pretty cool to actually see, because I know when they actually build them, at least from what I saw online, is that they'll do they kind of just blow up like a tent, and then they'll put rebar up, and they'll fit the rebar to the form of the actual tent, and they'll use shotcrete, and then they'll actually just spray it on there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like it's just I wonder if that would be quicker. You know what I mean? Like it's a different building method, but maybe it's the better building method.
It may not be quicker, but it's got the ability to be more intricate with the way it makes it. So you could actually have like alcoves in the dome, so where it can put like an electrical panel box or stuff like that, or actually make like as it's going, it can make a spot for like a concrete tube built into the wall, so you can have conduits and stuff.
That'd be really nice.
But you've got to have the person there. You've got to have a team there to
monitor.
work with it as it's going, because the concrete will settle if you just leave it.
Okay.
Yeah. So it makes a tube and you fill it.
That's pretty cool.
But yeah.
Run all your water lines or run all your electric lines and kind of just fish it through.
Yeah.
You want to have something that's like removable though, or like otherwise you're gonna have to be chiseling through the foundation to do anything, and that just makes it same thing. Do you want it like super sturdy or unrepairable?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it comes down to the design, whichever one you pick your poison. And I guess like it's not a one size fits all, because I mean some of them where they do that blow up tent, it may be more economical or even just more efficient for that location, and then some do it that way. And 3D printing might be like if you're in an urban environment where you have everything just there available, you can just like, okay, you have 5 of these things, we're building a whole block, just 3D print all of them one time.
Speaking of economical, one thing I want to like have like to show, like like throw up a picture of it, is how like the Romans developed the apartment complex.
Oh.
And it looks the same as it does nowadays, except the doors are smaller nowadays. Basically, the walls used to be like super thick from their like way of building, just like a modern of like cement and like just larger rocks put together, and they didn't have rebar and steel, so they just made really thick walls. But there's like 3-story apartment complexes in late Rome, because there was like really thick urban centers, and they needed a lot of places for a lot of people, and so they came up with this idea. They didn't have AC, so a lot of this just open windows and stuff like that. But it would be like the first floor would be like an avenue that you can walk through underneath, and then you had the upper floors up above, and they were just like apartments where people would live, and it was all made using like concrete, and it just like it blows my mind, because it's like the idea of like these houses were made like in the Jesus era of like like 0 BC kind of a thing, and we see it now as a modern building style, but it's more of like what was the best building style for the time for the people. So you got a high urban center with a lot of people. you want to get a lot of buildings as close together, as compact together. Like, like domes, feel like you can only put so many domes in an area, but like an apartment complex, you can fit a lot of people in.
Yeah, it's like squares and circles. It all goes back to like, preschool. Just putting them together, some things just work better than others.
Yeah, and even so, I feel like we're kind of rediscovering a lot of things.
Yeah.
Of like, okay, why did these people do this? And then like we're coming back to like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the apartment complex where it's just, everybody living in one spot.
Everyone's got a balcony.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's efficient. You just kind of change the efficiency.
Yeah, and instead of thinking of like a balcony as like an external balcony, like imagine like a recessed balcony, like like your area.
Yeah.
It's like where you get air from and stuff like that, and airflow in buildings. It makes sense.
I didn't know that was the actual reason why they even did those. That's really smart.
Yeah, you just open it up and you got air coming in one.
Yeah, one way and another. I see they're trying to do that.
If your buildings are made from solid stone, they will last hundreds of years. They didn't have wood and insulation.
Yeah.
Nah, this is solid brick. This is rock.
That's an American thing,
Wood frame?
It's like, this cold rock right here. Who needs AC?
I mean, that's the brilliance of living in a Mediterranean.
Yeah.
You paint your houses. They use the quicklime to whitewash their houses so it reflects it. No. There's still some cities that do that today, where it's like really controversial for people to paint their houses anything other than white.
Yeah.
Because it'll ruin the aesthetic. It's become known of the cities. But yeah, you think about it. Like we all our roofs are black here, and they don't understand it because after seeing these things and reading about this, it's like, why aren't all our roofs white? It's because people would complain about them looking dirty.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like it's for aesthetics versus like really it would do a great number to cool down our houses if we had white roofs.
Everybody complains about their attic being like 100 and something degrees.
It's like, well, you have no vent up
there. Yeah. It's a
know.
Black roof. It has no vents. It's
It always makes me wonder why they don't have like I guess it would be hard to kind of maintain it, but like
people complain.
Attic fans, like specifically like just to only blow air through the attic. I feel like that would do like a great number for just keeping your house cool.
Some do.
It's
an expense.
Yeah, you can put it on the soffit. And just basically it sucks out, so it just creates a negative pressure and just.
They used to be really popular like 10 years ago. You'd see them on top. There'd be like these domes and they'd be spinning. And in the last 10, 20 years, I've seen them just disappear. I don't see them anymore at all.
There's a redesign of it because I think that one had some issues, and there's a new redesign. I think in recent, say 5-10 years, they redesigned it and it's much more efficient because that one it had issues where birds would just make a nest or just anything just gets inside and they're like, yeah, we have to fix that.
Okay, and the new ones might just be less visible, so they could be a thing in people, like depending. If you own the house, you want it to run as good as you can, but if you're renting the house, you just kind of want it to be as cheap as possible.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to like people kind of just like, that's an extra expense. How much time am I going to do with the attic? I'll just suffer it.
Cost benefit.
Yeah, it's.
Sucks for me, the plumber, when I gotta get up there.
Oh, I can imagine.
Even so, like the efficiency of the whole entire house goes down if your attic's hot, because it's connected.
If you're like the homeowner and you're renting, you're not paying the electric bill though.
That is true.
So
yeah, the rental properties, they definitely don't really get as much love.
Yeah, versus like a person who owns the property and really wants to go in for like max efficiency.
Yeah, and even so, some people who own their own houses, they're not aware that this is actually a thing that's not on the market that can help. You're just like, the attic's just always hot because they went from a rental house that it's always a hot attic, and they just had their own house and they're like, what can you do?
Oh, yeah. So that brings me up to an idea that you had mentioned earlier. So we talked about how, like in the beginning with the ziggurats, we had like mud brick with straw in there. You wanted to talk about concrete with we had asbestos, which was the miracle material of the decade. Created so much of our infrastructure that's still in use today. These are those 100-year buildings that like pipes and plumbing. Asbestos plumbing is the most durable plumbing we've ever had.
Yeah.
Like it's still lasting to this day. They've taken it out. They've done samples. And it's still in perfect condition. While our modern plumbing is struggling to get up to that level, The problem was, despite it being a wonder material that doesn't catch fire, it's flexible. There's like concrete pipes that have gone through like major earthquakes, and because it's flexible, it doesn't shatter. And it's been there for like hundreds of years, gone through massive earthquakes, and it's still in perfect condition. But it just gives everyone cancer who touches it, so like or breathes it in or works with it or cuts it, and it's just
It's a trade-off, you know.
it's a deadly trade-off.
It's
So-
a cancer, but you can poop, so it's a
So a lot of the time we've got to leave in place like decision for it. Sometimes they'll put in like a liner on it, like a plastic liner. They'll like just go and like inflate it through, and so it's like, you know, things are like a bit more safe, but it's like still like it's insane that this is like one of the best materials we've come up with.
Okay.
It's just terrible because like, you know, the fibers are like holding together the concrete, and because they're like not organic, they're stone fibers. It doesn't rot, it doesn't like burn, it doesn't shrivel up, it just stays there. And it has the same like coefficient of flexibility. So as the concrete heats up, it like expands at the same rate. And because it's expanding and contracting at the same rate as the concrete, it doesn't crack when it freezes.
That's great.
So it's just like this perfect material that is deadly.
Yeah.
And it's such a tragedy. And so you're talking about like new ways forward from asbestos, like, you know, like new fillers for concrete rather than steel, and like
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, because especially when asbestos came out in the market, everyone's like, "Ah, this is the greatest thing." They used to use it for drywall. They used to use it for brakes in your car, cladding your houses. Because I mean, who doesn't want a fireproof house?
Roof tiles,
everything. They were using it for everything. But then they found out that it's cancerous, and it's become just like a mission to get rid of it now, because I mean, yeah, it's cancerous. Of course, you probably need to get rid of it. But
it's changed recently. It's no longer get rid of everything. It's like leave it in place.
Yeah.
Unless the house needs to be demoed, or like renovated, and then it becomes an issue.
Yeah, that's the case. But then when you do have to go through that process, you have to be in hazmat suits. Everything has to be just get rid of it. Make sure all the dust is gone, or you can cause disuse in the environment and all of that.
There's so many buildings too that just sit around because they don't want to pay.
Yeah.
And that, you know, like you don't want to pay for the full abatement to demolish a house. So there's like just houses. People are like, this is a perfectly good building here. Why does no one want to do it? It's like, well, they found asbestos in it, but people don't realize most houses built before the 70s have asbestos in it. It just comes to tearing it down. It's so expensive that people just rather leave it rot.
Yeah, and I kind of have a. I like new technologies to kind of combat these things, but if we end up in another asbestos situation, it would be terrible.
I think about that a lot. Like, how many things do we do without realizing that they're just equally as bad? Like, you know, like, oh, we've replaced asbestos with fiberglass, and we find out it's the same issues.
Yeah, and I guess with I'm all for renewable energy, and I think we discussed this, that solar may not be as just the whole
the
process
panels themselves.
It may not be as environmentally friendly as we initially thought.
And nobody thinks of end of life when they're first making a thing.
Yep.
And how it's like all the chemical seepages from those things, and it's like we're gonna have a ton of toxic chemicals to try to deal with and recycle very soon.
Even getting them, like I think we were talking about like the lithium batteries, just getting the material for those, like it's not good stuff. It's very bad.
Yeah, lithium mines are crazy. Probably just like you can probably put a picture of how they actually look. Like it's insane. Some of the mines, and they have to constantly wash it basically with water, so it has to be close to a water source. So that takes away from whatever water source was going to wherever. Like you say you had a river, you have to redirect the river just to actually get
divert a river.
Yeah.
Just actively working against nature.
Yeah, it's just like you just constantly, and chip manufacturing is a similar thing where you have to just have tons of water.
Waves of computers, waves of phones, smartphones that go out, everything that goes out.
Brings up an important question though. It's just like, how do we know we're moving forward rather than staying the same in terms of actually health, but also just like, you know, what are we doing like for the environment? Not for the environment per se, but
just as a society.
Like, just like, oh, we're going green, but then you find out going green is just, we're still just digging the hole deeper. Like, what is there any way to actually even combat it at this point?
I think some of the
things like you dig in a different hole.
Yeah,
you just got out of that hole and dig another one.
I think everything's got a trade-off. Like moving away from newspapers to reading everything on a phone has probably done a tremendous amount in a very unseeable way.
Mm-hmm.
Where at the same time, a lot of the newspapers were moving toward. Newspapers were one of the few things that were using 100% recycled material because people didn't care about the quality of the paper.
Yeah.
So
I love a good feeling newspaper.
Yeah, and it's just like that contrast where we're no longer using that recycled. Nobody uses recycled paper because nobody likes the quality of recycled paper. Like you wouldn't print out like your assignments to hand in on newspaper quality paper.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's like it's you got that trade-off where it's like, yeah, we're no longer making a ton of newspapers, but also what are we doing with all this recycled paper that nobody wants? It's sometimes it's more expensive if you're not like getting bulk amounts of it. Same with the recycled plastic. Like you've seen recycled park benches. They're kind of weird, ugly color. They only come in that color because it's all the plastics mixed together, so it's all brown and it's lumpy. It's got a rough texture to it, and you can sand it and stuff like that. But it's like only municipalities use it because the people that's all like nobody really wants that kind of plastic, and it's kind of got a little bit of engineering unpredictability to it as well because it's a mixture of things.
So I could see that being as like a substitute for like wood decks, because I feel like those things last pretty long, honestly. And
They
like
do.
if you want to, you could probably just repaint it, and you wouldn't necessarily have to have it looking like wood. You could have a blue deck if you wanted, and just touch it up every now and again.
Yeah.
That probably wouldn't be a bad building material for like outdoor things like that, the small things.
Yeah, that's why I find it mostly like used in those situations like that. It's just the price of it starts to get uncompetitive, which is where it starts to get not dangerous, but like in like competition.
Yeah.
Where it's like you pay more and you feel good because you're using recycled sometimes.
But it does come down sometimes to what you're actually going for.
Yeah.
And also that delicate balance of like, okay, supply and demand. If they actually have more people using it, then the price may go down. But getting to that point is that
You get enough
those first people are going to have to pay the price just so we can get that price down to that level.
Well, yeah, one of the really assuring things about concrete that I found is that it's really it's recyclable. Like they can crush it up and use it as aggregate for other mixes and stuff like that. So it's like you can use it as filler material for gravel. You can they've got special crushers that can crush to different sizes.
Yep.
So you can make different aggregate from construction debris. And then it's like some projects, even down like with the reef projects and stuff like that, where they're like putting concrete, or, like these broken up rocks and like stuff like that to like try to promote like hard surfaces for marine growth and stuff like that to recreate coral, which is like one of these really cool circular like processes because concrete really comes from like early corals and stuff like that were like just died off and shells and things, marine life, and it just died, settled on the bottom of the oceans. And those made like the early limestone layers and soils and stuff like that we mine nowadays to like make concrete from. And so it's kind of going back to where it started, and like a big old circle that takes like millions of years to happen. But the fact that the corals that made the limestone that we made the concrete, and then the concrete's broken down to make more coral, is kind of a cool thing, and how it can be reused.
So concrete is renewable.
In a very, very, very long term. It's like kind of saying like our cemeteries are helping rebuild gasoline for the future. Concrete boats, they existed.